Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs Programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year, we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. Since the March 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country, the Reagan Foundation is now bringing its events online to ensure that we are still delivering world-class content, even if you can't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you Fox News host Maria Bartiromo and the Wall Street Journal's James Freeman for their new book, The Cost: Trump, China, and the American Revival. Maria Bartiromo joined Fox Business Network as the Global Markets Editor in January of 2014. She is the anchor of Mornings with Maria, as well as Sunday Morning Futures on that channel. James Freeman is assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page and author of the weekday Best of the Web column. With their front row seats to one of the most extraordinary moments in American history, in The Cost, Maria Bartiromo and James Freeman look back at President Trump's first term. During today's conversation, they discuss their book and explain why, in the wake of the coronavirus, which clearly has had an effect on the economy, now more than ever, strong leadership is critical for American revival and recovery. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program, coming to you from our Air Force One Pavilion Leadership Academy Oval Office, with Maria Bartiromo and James Freeman, and Reagan Foundation Institute Executive Director John Hybush.
Maria, James, just a terrific book. Thank you for joining us at the Reagan Library. I hope one day that you'll be able to come out with this book in person, live and in color, but for now, we'll take you virtually during this virus. But I just want to say I finished the book just yesterday, and it was just wonderful. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Great to hear. Yeah. And now there's a vaccine, so we might be there before you know it.
Exactly. Okay, so yesterday, Maria, I watched your show, as I often do. And your guess and much of the conversation, we'll start it off this way, was all about this election, concerns over, as President Trump would say, it being rigged, lots of fraud and the rest of that. Do you have a view on that? I know conventional wisdom in Washington would be, okay, he's just making the standard complaints. But it's going to be a Biden presidency. Or is it more serious than that?
Well, look, I think that right now we need to follow the law and follow the truth where it takes us. It's what I've been saying is it's hard to give the other side the benefit of the doubt right now, knowing the massive rabbit holes that they've taken us down for the last 4 years with Russia collusion and then obstruction and then, of course, an impeachment trial with, no crime. And then just most recently, the Democratic blue wave. So I think that we know that there have been episodes of irregularities, whether it be dead people voting or double ballots, or in some cases, ballots that never had President Trump's name on them. So I know that there are, episodes of these things. And I think given the fact that we are about to enter active litigation, we need to let the courts take over and we need to investigate what we've seen. What are these episodes? And is it episodic? And, oftentimes, unfortunately, realistic, or is it something more systematic? And I think that that's where we are right now. So as much as I, honor my industry and appreciate all that has been said, it's really not the media's role to say who will be the next president. This is the role of the, electoral state officials, and that's what I'd like to see in terms of the certification in the next couple of weeks. And in the meantime, we do have active recounting going on right now, for example, in Georgia. So I don't think it's a stretch to say, let's take a breath and let's see where the law and the truth seeking takes us.
It's hard to do this, but if you could take the vaccine and the news of today and the market out, has the market built in a Biden victory, in your opinion, and what we're seeing is, okay, things are going to go back to normal, or no, is there the market, it's totally uncertain what's going to happen, and we don't know where this is going to go?
I would say that the market has been reacting right now to the notion of a divided government and the notion that the Republicans would still hold on to the Senate. Now, if we were to learn that Joe Biden will in fact be the 46th president of the United States, we know, and James and I wrote about his plans, and some of which are progressive, that he's agreed upon with Bernie Sanders and the more progressive arm of the Democrat Party. And I think right now, what we've seen in the Senate and the victories in this election is the market is expecting, investors are expecting that there will be a wall in the Senate. And they will stop things like $4.3 trillion in tax increases and the Green New Deal. But the truth is the January 5th runoff elections in Georgia are so important right now in that regard that I would not be surprised to see, a massive sell-off in the stock market should the Republicans lose that majority.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, James.
I guess I would just add to that the issue we talk about and Maria talks about on the show is that you have had this remarkable Federal Reserve intervention this year, creating $3 trillion. So that always makes the sort of the message of the market a little more difficult to discern because there is a lot of money sloshing around right now, driving up asset prices. But yeah, I would agree. I think investors who remember the 90s after Republicans took over the House in the 94 elections, and then you had Democrat Bill Clinton in the White House, the Newt Gingrich Congress, you ended up with very good policy and very good growth in the late 90s. Our friend Paul Krugman didn't think the economy could grow as fast in the 90s as it did, and he's been making odd predictions ever since then. Most famously, election night 2016, when he said the markets would never recover, and Maria was correctly predicting a big rally. So we talk about that in the book as well. But I think the message of the markets right now, I would say, as much as you could strip out that Fed intervention, is that Republican Senate, Biden in the White House means you essentially have Trump policy status quo. And that's been pretty good for the economy and markets.
Yeah, I didn't remember this until I read the book. But Maria, you were quoted maybe a day or no more than a couple of days after Trump first won. And I think you were a bit of a contrarian, but right at the time, because you said, with Trump, I am buying the market with both feet. And so,
anyway.
Yeah. So let me ask you, finish that sentence. If it's Biden, I am.
Well, I'm a little more cautious watching what kind of policies may play out. If his instinct, and we know Kamala Harris's instinct, is to go sharp left toward big spending programs, big government programs, and higher taxes, then I'm shorting this market with both hands. If we see a check in the Senate where the Republicans will stop some of this spending, then maybe I'm counting on the Federal Reserve, as James noted, and it's easy money. And maybe then I'm looking for, opportunities, growth and value. I'm not sure. I have to assess where we are in terms of valuation. But certainly policies matter. And, if you're going to look at, unending spending, major programs, higher taxes, things like, the capital gains tax going from 23% to 44%, that's a big deal. And that does, I think, dictate a person's portfolio. Money is mobile. It will go where it's treated best. And if that means I'm moving my money to low tax states or low tax countries, that's what it means. And so I think that depending on what these policies are and whether or not there's a check on the Republican side will dictate how much I allocate my portfolio to equities.
Okay. Donald Trump I think, was not a new phenomenon to both of your lives before he won the presidency. You all covered him, or you must have known him pre-White House days. Is that right?
I knew him a little. I mean, I had him on as a real estate developer, and certainly he was, I don't know, part of the parlance, I guess, with his program, you're fired and The Apprentice and all that. But, as in terms of knowing him as a businessman, I certainly did cover him and had him on a few times when I was at CNBC in real estate conversations. James, how about you?
I met him in 2015 when he was a candidate, so I didn't have a long experience with him. And I have to say, it took me a while to appreciate his virtues. I really did not take his candidacy seriously at first. I had been sort of disturbed by the policy comments he'd made over the years. So he, as president, he really has wildly exceeded my expectations, I have to admit.
Yeah, well, let me admit it too. I was in that same 99% of America that didn't think he was going to win. What a surprise it turned out to be, a consistent conservative. Just stunning, it seems. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think anyone really would have called that he has, I would say, appointed the most impressive group of judges to the federal bench, and of course 3 great justices, than really anyone certainly in the modern era. Reagan is, of course, the gold standard for presidents generally, but in terms of judicial appointments, it's pretty hard to argue with the Trump picks. And so I think those are things that we're all, whatever our political views, we're going to be appreciating for a long, long time. Judges who interpret the law as written, not what they wish it to be. And I think Justice Amy Coney Barrett is going to be really an amazing addition here. Probably too much to forecast right now that she's going to have the influence of that great Reagan appointee, Antonin Scalia. That's sort of the gold standard when it comes to Supreme Court justices. But I think very much in that mold of having humility as a justice and sticking to what is written, not what people wish it said or what they might have intended, but what the law says.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognize the impact that Donald Trump has had on the Republican Party. And, he's certainly been a big positive for the American people in terms of the economic impact and of his policies, but also look at the priorities that he pushed forward. They're all the priorities of the Republican Party that have tried to push these things forward, like tax cuts and the Tax and Jobs Act, like deregulation, all of the things that he did in terms of the Middle East policy as well, the relations with Israel. And of course, as you note, the most consequential of all are the federal judges, 250 of them, and the 3 Supreme Court justices. This does make him among the most consequential presidents we've seen.
You covered in your book many of Trump's accomplishments. But if there was a discipline and it said, okay, you can write a book, but you can only mention the 3 things, the 3 most fundamentally important things that President Trump was able to accomplish in his first term, what are they?
Well, I think that James and I were disciplined in terms of looking at things that we can measure, like economic policy. And I think we focused on economic policy and certainly his policy with regards to China. I think that both of us recognize that the successes certainly went beyond that into foreign policy, which we wanted to get into as well. But because we were disciplined in terms of looking at economic policy, we stopped there. But there was more to write in terms of his policy impact. I would say the most important would be the economic policy, including the tax legislation, the deregulation. I think that number 2 or number 3 has to be his handling of the relations with China. And as we write in the book, this is the first president in our 40-year engagement with China to actually push back and put consequences in place for the bad behavior that we've seen, and obvious motivation to overtake the United States as the #1 superpower. And, also being able to create a global partnership in pushing back, 30 countries now banning Huawei for all of the reasons that the Trump administration noted to be very serious. So I would say those are the top things certainly that we cover in the book, and among the most important.
And we do note that tariffs have costs. We sometimes disagree about how effective they've been, but I think really one thing we completely agree on is how President Trump deserves a lot of credit for questioning the premises of our long engagement with China, which turned out to be wrong, and his action, I think, pointing out to people that all of these benefits we've given the Chinese government in terms of welcoming them into our financial system, the world trading system, are premised on an optimism that reform was happening there on the political side, and it really wasn't. And I think we see that now, and we talk in the book going back to the original decision where Ronald Reagan normally didn't think expanding relations with communist governments was a good idea, but he trusted Nixon because he said Nixon had proven that he is a tough cookie dealing with communists. And so you go back and you look at the history starting then, and often these expanded relations were premised on issues that didn't come to pass. Mainly, as I said, just thinking that democracy was right around the corner. I think that's why President George H.W. Bush wasn't tougher during the Tiananmen Square or in the aftermath of the massacre, is he had a belief which has turned out to be wrong, I think well-intentioned, but he thought democracy was just around the corner and he didn't want to disrupt what he saw as kind of a delicate march toward a much better society there. And while there's been a lot of material wealth, we're happy that millions of people have been pulled out of poverty there. The political reform, human rights, the desire by that government to live peacefully with its neighbors, those things have not happened. So I think the president deserves a lot of credit for really restoring a realistic view of China, and not just an optimistic hope that this huge consumer market was all upside for us.
Sure.
And I think it's very concerning where we are right now with the uncertainty of where this relationship goes, given the fact that even during the coronavirus, the Chinese Communist Party used the opportunity to gain more territory, going into India, killing 20 soldiers, militarizing the South China Sea, moving into Hong Kong, putting new laws down that you could, arrest anyone anywhere for saying anything about the Communist Party. I think it's a really enormous threat, and I hope that this check stays in place.
Well, you guys are giving me great segues to several other questions I have, but specifically on China. So let's presuppose Biden wins this thing. Is China going to go right back to eating our lunch?
I think so. I don't see a very different scenario, only based on what we've heard from Joe Biden. I mean, he said initially China really wasn't that big of a threat, wasn't this significant a competitor. We know that there's a closer partnership with Joe Biden and the Chinese Communist Party. We know the way Donald Trump has poked back. It's worrisome. And we also know that China has been very strategic in terms of getting in the inside of American institutions and being able to steal information. I mean, we talk about a number of stories in the book in corporate America, where we've spoken with the CEO of Motorola, who got his company out of China because of the intellectual theft. And they were caught red-handed, literally. Or Steve Ballmer at Microsoft saying, yeah, it costs us $10 billion a year in profits. And others. Look at the string of indictments that you saw just this year. The chemistry teacher, the head of the chemistry department at Harvard, or the Houston embassy, where now we know that there are in fact spy centers that are incorporated within the embassy. So I do think the Chinese Communist Party has been very effective at being able to get inside of our institutions and take information out and continue its intellectual property theft. The president, in our interview for the book, walked us through, the negotiations and took us behind the table a little, behind the door rather. And, they refused to even admit they were stealing intellectual property. And, all business leaders we spoke with would admit it. And even James, in our conversations when we had with some CEOs who weren't out and out vocal about it, they too were questioning the CCP.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of an eye opener for both of us the last few years, just seeing how many, I guess what you would say, members of the global elite that are supposed to be the people who are most bullish on our engagement with China, that often you will get very positive comments from them on the record, but then off the record, it seems like they almost all have a story of their inventions, their trade secrets, et cetera, being stolen or coerced or abused by the Chinese government or actors within China that receive no punishment from the government there. So I think I don't think this issue goes away. I mean, I think possibly the press, don't know, maybe this is a little optimistic, gets a little more interested in investigating the Hunter Biden China business, and maybe that's a pressure over the next year or so for Joe Biden to prove that he's going to have a tough policy on this front. Certainly during the Democratic campaign debates we saw, you seem to have a large recognition that although they didn't like Donald Trump, they thought he was onto something in terms of trying to curb Chinese behavior. But there is a history there. We go through it in the book, where I think this was one of the most underreported stories, and maybe the biggest miscalculation of the Obama-Biden administration was roughly 2012, when Xi Jinping is coming to power in China, and there was not a recognition, I think, among political leaders in the press here in the United States that this was a big setback for liberty and for reform, and that he is an old-fashioned communist thug. Joe Biden saw him as a sort of friend and partner, and I think, I would hope at least by this time he is, whether or not he'll admit it publicly, I would hope Mr. Biden understands that he was taken in a way.
Had the coronavirus never erupted out of China, if there was no such thing, Trump was headed to a likely landslide win, wasn't he?
I'd say so. I mean, the policies have impacted people's lives. They have, in fact, put people at a better place. Remember, before COVID showed up in March, we were looking at a situation where income inequality was actually beginning to narrow, because you saw the earnings on the bottom level of the income scale moving up faster than the top. And so, we were seeing more job openings than actually job seekers. So, yeah, we were at a moment in time where I think people would have clearly said, I feel better today than I did 4 years ago.
And you have to wonder on this vaccine news. I mean, to the extent there was a coherent Biden argument against Trump, it was basically that he had mismanaged the virus response. And obviously, a lot of people in our industry thought it was outrageous or comical that President Trump was saying there would be a vaccine this year. He caught a lot of flack for that. I think we should go back and see all the fact checkers and what they were claiming at the time. But it appears, you know, there's some caveats. We'll see. Need peer review. Need some more data. But it appears that there actually is a vaccine, and so I can't help but wonder if that news came out earlier, how that might have affected votes as well.
Yeah, and just it seems, you know, magnificently ironic that with the news of the vaccine and the fact that it'll start being distributed, you know, maybe just a few weeks after Biden takes office, Trump did all the hard work, right? There's not, then it's going to be.
I mean, Pfizer says they didn't actually get any of the warp speed money, but certainly the government has funded a lot of the efforts. There are other candidates that are, you know, maybe getting some good news coming out soon. We'll see, but certainly the prediction that this great medical research enterprise we have in this country would have a solution this year turned out to be accurate. And I think if people had known that, they might have looked at the issue differently.
And when he said we will get a vaccine by the end of the year, literally he was laughed at.
You couldn't find two styles more different than Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. But you both remember that, you know, the term Reaganomics. In fact, I know you remember because you compare it to something, I hadn't read it in other places, but you call it Trumponomics, right? And my sense is, I mean, Trump had a tremendous amount of courage, but it seemed to me like just about every morning he would get up, open up the Reagan playbook, take a page out of it, modernize it, and go make Trumponomics happen. Is that a good theory or a bad one?
Well, I mean, one thing I've really enjoyed about his presidency is so much of that Reagan pro-growth idea reflected in his policies. And yeah, that was sort of the Ronald Reagan's old joke that he knew his program was working when they stopped calling it Reaganomics in the press. And we can see in the book kind of a similar phenomenon where you knew the Trump program was working because President Obama and his friends in the media kept saying that we were really enjoying the legacy of the Obama years, and his work had set the table for all of this, which, you know, people can argue about that, but there's no question that the premise of that statement is that things are pretty good. And as Maria was recounting, by a lot of measures, the job market was it's really been the best ever. I mean, pre-COVID, in terms of job openings and low unemployment rates and rising wages for people in the lower income levels. It's really was kind of a golden age, and then seems like it's happening again since COVID. More than 11 million jobs created in 6 months.
And I think that as a businessman, Donald Trump benefited from Reaganomics and understood the value in cutting red tape and cutting the middle guy out and all of the bureaucracy that goes along with taking years and decades to get anything done. And I think him coming in as a businessman, having experienced all of that firsthand, made him, you know, sure that this is where we needed to go in terms of policy to make progress and create growth.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a huge part of it. Regulation can be kind of an abstract idea to a lot of people, but when Maria and I talked to the president, he explained how he thought it was just awful the way if you were trying to build something in New York, you had to spend millions of dollars on consultants who populate Albany and Washington to get the various federal and state approvals. And it's this bizarre, complicated maze that small business people in particular have so much trouble navigating. And I think his experience really allowed him to see that in a way that career politicians usually can't.
And if you look at the Trump presidency, he cut out a lot of all that staff work. I mean, just decision. Okay, move the embassy, Tel Aviv, make it happen. Or, you know, he just seemed to get right to the point, right? That seemed to be his strength. Cut taxes, cut regulations, move the embassy, and succeeded by keeping it simple, it seems to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that certainly resonated and resonates with his base, that he doesn't care how it sounds. If it sounds rough and tumble, if it sounds too aggressive, to get right to the point, he gets right to the point and says, this is what needs to be done. And that's what they appreciate, because there's not any coloring it. And, you know, he's not a politician. He may not say it perfectly. He just wants to get right to it and create progress.
Yeah, we talk about his manners in the book are not always ideal, but I think this is kind of the other side of the coin of that. It can be kind of a rough personality for some people, but it also comes with someone who doesn't have the normal, I guess you would say, normal fears of a generic Republican politician who I think maybe would normally be afraid of pushing regulatory reform, because even if they might realize it's needed, they realize also that it's hard. It can be hard in the press to explain and define it and sort of deal with the onslaught and unfair criticism that comes. And I think similarly, I don't know if a generic Republican president would have had really the courage and the wisdom to put Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. So I think he's got some rough edges, but really remarkable results, I think, because he's not too afraid of catching heat.
Yeah. Yeah, your book, I thought, was magnificent in how you chose to lay out the case on this whole Russiagate, impeachment, all the rest of it, the timelines you put in, really a great job of, and the story just unfolds before you as the reader sees that. James Comey, as the head of the FBI, was really chiefly responsible for 2 years of this impeachment mess. Would you agree?
I mean, you have to say so, because he's the director of the FBI, and you have to believe that this was the most important case that the director of the FBI is ever overseeing. You are investigating the president of the free world. And, I think I have been unable to get over the kind of resistance in this regard that this president has faced. And it's, I think, that reason why oftentimes, more often than not, I will raise my hand and say, well, wait a minute, what about what happened in 2016? Because it's really not about Trump. It's about the fairness of our system. And it's about, innocent people being wiretapped for political gain, and the weaponizing of our intelligence apparatus. And so I think that, given the fact that we know that they knew that the dossier was not true and garbage in January of 2017, and they still renewed a wiretap on Carter Page 3 months later, and then 3 months later again, another wiretap. And we know that one FBI agent actually altered a document to say that Carter Page was not a source for the CIA, when in fact he was. And we know that there are all these other questionable encounters by former spies and who were running into Trump campaign people and dropping little tidbits of stuff. And it looks to me like they were trying to set them up for perjury. And so I think that now that we know, I mean, I sniffed it out very early on and I got slammed for it, which is why I can't give anybody the benefit of the doubt now after the media, it was so incredible the way the media just went with this story and drove the bus on it. And then it just sort of like a snowball kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that when you are looking for the villains, the perpetrators, you have to believe that the head of the FBI knew what was going on. He's the director of the FBI, and he's handling and overseeing arguably the most important case he's ever had in his lifetime.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons it was such a pleasure to work on this with Maria, is because her show did have this story when so much of the media was pushing the other way. And the more that's come out, it's just, it's mind-boggling when you review the history, and what's come out within the last year is really more damning evidence of the Comey FBI, where we see how he's had this congressional testimony in the aftermath where he's presenting himself as sort of largely unaware of this, of the dossier, of the case. He says he doesn't really know how such cases begin. So all of this was extremely hard to believe. Like, as Maria was saying, really, you're investigating a rival presidential campaign and then the president of the United States, and this is sort of one of a countless number of cases. Of course, this was the biggest case you were ever involved in. How could you not have been dialed in? And then you see with the documents that have come out, while he may be presenting himself publicly as vaguely aware of these details, he was actively pushing the dossier, what we now know as garbage, among the other members of the intelligence community. And you see it, especially in early 2017, where the FBI begins to get, if they hadn't figured it out already, they begin getting another series of reports showing that the dossier was garbage. The primary subsource telling them some of it was made up in jest, and it was bar talk, and also evidence from the U.S. intelligence community saying that some of this was fabricated by Russian intelligence services to mess with us. So by early 2017, the fact that the Comey FBI was still pushing this is really just appalling. And we certainly just hope and pray this never happens again, because if this is a regular part of our elections where the essentially the incumbent government turns the security apparatus on an opponent, it's hard to see how you maintain the rule of law. And that's why we took, there's a lot of time in the book, even though the book is mainly about economics, is because we just both felt very strongly that this is something that can't be repeated.
And even though this is the biggest part of the resistance and probably the most consequential part of the resistance, we were really struck at the amount of resistance this president has faced from day one, and the way that he was able to have these incredible successes in terms of policy while also being faced with this just brick wall of resistance. And don't forget, also worth noting, is while they were doing an investigation of Trump, they were also supposedly investigating Hillary Clinton and her use of a private server. And, that whole investigation was a non-investigation. The fact that, you could have Loretta Lynch, then a sitting AG, tell Jim Comey to not refer to it as an investigation, but instead call it a matter. And that's what he did. He came out, he said it was a matter. And then the fact that you could have Loretta Lynch meet Hillary Clinton's husband, President Clinton, on the tarmac in Phoenix, Arizona, 3 days before she is to be interviewed by the FBI about this server. And then finding the emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop. I mean, all of these things, while they were supposed to be, and then they changed the language. It was gross negligence. And then it was changed to a softer term so that, it wouldn't be seen as criminal in terms of using the server. So I think that's also quite outrageous that, it just tells the world that depending on who's in power, that will dictate whether the rule of law is followed or not. And I was quite outraged by it because I actually didn't realize that. I mean, I spent 20 years of my career working at CNBC, covering markets, covering the economy, balance sheets. Then I got to Fox 7 years ago, and these were the two stories that I basically started getting a deep dive in: Trump and this Russia hoax and China. And as I learned increasingly over the years and talking to various people in Washington, I was stunned to learn that this kind of corruption actually exists, that you could have one political candidate just able to turn the apparatus of the intelligence agencies of the US government, weaponize them against her political enemy, and actually they could set somebody up like that. It's just so extraordinary. And it really is like a Hollywood movie. It's terrible. It should never happen again. And I wish more people understood the crux of this, because I think because the other side tried to muddy it so much, throw all these headlines about Russia, 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 many people really did not understand the true nuts and bolts of this coup to take him down.
You know, I've worked for members of Congress, members of the Senate, run national party committees. You know, I've spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. But if you were working on behalf of and in support of an official like that, and they say a single word that's out of place, you know, or they don't phrase something, you know, to the letter of the law, what's your reaction? You try to help them. You know, Mr. President, I know what you said. This is what you probably mean, right? You know, but no. What Comey did was walk into that office and take notes. I mean, he was looking, you know, for a criminal, right? I mean, that's what we ended up with, someone who was not trying to assist the president, but somebody who was trying to get the president. That's my impression.
I would say a number of things he did are just hard to defend at all. I mean, we see from his notes that he knew that no news organization was going to run with the dossier because there was nothing behind it. They had no facts to back it up. He knew the only thing, he says this in internal communication, that something occurring related to it in government was what would give them essentially the hook or the excuse to run with it. And he essentially created that by insisting on including the dossier, what we now know as garbage, in the official intelligence assessment in January 2017 that's given to President Obama and President-elect Trump. And this is something where even the CIA had pushed back, saying this is internet gossip. This doesn't belong in an intelligence assessment. The compromise was eventually CIA and Comey's FBI, they say, okay, well, it won't be in the assessment, but it'll be in an appendix. And so adding it then gave news organizations, CNN in particular, what they made them comfortable to say, okay, we're now going to talk about this dossier because important people in the government are talking about it. And they were important people who by then should have known there was nothing behind it. And you see this series of events where it's pretty clear we now know the dossier story was falling apart. And yet you would think from the anonymous leak-fueled media reports that the Russia story was getting bigger. In fact, it was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but the media coverage was telling you there's a president with the walls closing in around him, and now there's more. And it was, you would hope there is some accountability now for the officials, and especially the one who ran the FBI.
I think it's really critical because the truth is, and I think we would all agree, John, that you know what? People don't trust the FBI anymore. People don't trust our institutions, and it's gotten worse. We need to be able to trust the Department of Justice is operating with the goal of justice. And by the way, Jim Comey also all but admitted that he was ambushing General Michael Flynn, if you remember, in that MSNBC Nicole Wallace interview, where he sat there quite arrogantly, actually, and said, well, you know, we would not have gotten away with it in any other administration, but because we figured it was chaotic, we just said, oh, I'm going to send a few agents over there, wanting General Flynn to be, quote unquote, jocular. And just, you know, not really worried that he needed a lawyer, or not worried about what he would say, so that they could walk him into saying something that could be considered perjury.
If Trump were to write a book about his first term, in my opinion, and I want to see if you agree, the title would be, and this would sum up the Trump presidency, Promises Made, Promises Kept. Do you agree?
Yeah, he's kept his promises, and he's done it with courage, even though it was something that a lot of the people in Washington may not have done and didn't want to do. He's kept his promises on the economy. He's kept his promises on judges. He's kept his promises on foreign policy.
Yeah, I think this is one of the ways the media generally has really failed to cover him, because you've seen obviously so much coverage of inaccurate statements he's made, but I think they have ignored that he has remained faithful to the agenda he promised in 2016. I would say more than any major politician I remember. Many of them, they run on things and then they get elected and they ignore them. He has remained faithful to that agenda. I mean, not all of it I agree with. Some immigration and trade issues, I see things differently, but I think he ought to get credit, and rarely does, for giving us almost exactly what he promised in 2016. It's remarkable, and obviously with a lot of achievements along the way. We would say, we talk in the book, the one big failing, I guess you could say, is the spending and debt. Now, that was a little bit of a mixed message in 2016, because he said he wasn't going to touch entitlements. He talked about balancing a budget, but I think it wasn't something that people expected a lot of spending austerity from him. But in that respect, he's kind of turned out to be like all the other politicians there. Unfortunately, we wish maybe he was a little more of a maverick on that side as well. But you go down the list: tax reform, deregulation. The wall was not my priority, but he actually, besides the physical wall, he got Mexico to pay to increase enforcement on its southern border to limit the flow of illegal migration. So I think, agree with him or not, you really ought to give him credit for pursuing exactly the agenda he promised voters.
He was also very effective in connecting the dots to national security and communicating the issues around national security as it relates to the wall, as it relates to China. He truly did make sure that America was his priority, and America first may have bothered some people. It never bothered me, because what would you expect from the president of the United States, to put the United States first? I mean, that's what I would expect. So I think it's unfortunate that I think his legacy will be different than what we see it today. I think
you mentioned the deal. I mean, this is a game changer, and the idea that he has peacefully turned so many of these adversaries or potential adversaries into now friends with Israel. This is kind of stunning, and I think we'll see. Maybe it gets undone. I hope not over the next 4 years, but it looks like a massive achievement that is not being appreciated at the moment. Now we'll see in time, but looks like really an amazing effort where he kind of created leverage out of nothing and changed decades of enmity into commercial relations.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that the president of Mexico will not congratulate anybody in this election yet. He wants to see the litigation take place, and he wants to ensure that it's certified before congratulating anyone. And the president of Mexico, where President Trump's critics will say he is a racist. I mean, meanwhile, you've had an incredible record showing from certainly the Hispanic community in this election.
Yeah, I can't help but, James, going back to what you say about, Trump wasn't able to keep his promise on balanced budget or cutting the deficit. I mean, find me another Republican in the last 5-6 years that have that have given a darn about the federal deficit, and I'll eat my hat, right? We
talk about the book. This wasn't really an argument for Biden, because he was promising to spend and borrow more, but I think maybe it goes to show it's kind of hard to if you sort of separate the Trump rhetoric, the tweeting, and the media circus that surrounds him from a kind of objective analysis, and that's what we tried to do in the book. As Maria said, just focus on things you can measure. The achievements are remarkable, and I tend to think I think the policies will be recognized as valuable, even if the people in our industry and the academic world insist on hating him. I think they will grudgingly acknowledge some policy successes.
Presume we do have a President Biden. Is Trump, if we look back on this, whether you're in the Republican Party or not, do you think Trump's going to be viewed as a transitional president, or no, he's actually transformational and he will have made a difference in the party and in the nation for a long time to come?
I think so. I think he will be transformational. I think he has had an incredible impact on the Republican Party, even as little as pushing them to fight back more so. I mean, someone said to me recently, look, the Republicans are always the party that says, okay, we'll bend, or we don't want to get into the mud. But the truth is the Democrats will get into the mud, and President Trump doesn't care. He gets right there and calls their bluff. And I think that has rubbed off on the party and made them tougher in terms of sticking to their principles in some cases. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I think that he's had an incredible impact on the Republican Party, given his priorities, pushing through all of the priorities of the GOP and actually getting them through.
Yeah, I would hope I guess you might call it the Reagan style Trump economic policies on taxes and deregulation will be a legacy. I also think it's interesting where, despite everything or most things you read and hear in the media, that he seems to have made the Republicans more competitive among Black voters, Hispanic voters. And I think that's interesting to see if he's kind of changed the game there, where he's, these are big, diverse communities. So I think for people in South Florida, obviously the Democrats' embrace of socialists like Bernie Sanders is a big concern. There and other places, the economic vitality of the Trump years made people think about going Republican. And I think what's going to be interesting is the way the president has, I think, started a really good conversation about the failures in big city governance. And I think that might be an interesting trend to watch going forward. If some of these towns that have been run by Democrats, like Baltimore, since Nancy Pelosi's brother was mayor in the 1960s, it's been all Democrats running it, and with horrible results. And I think if the Trump era kind of starts another look at what works and what doesn't in big cities, and getting people to consider abandoning one-party rule if that's what they've been going with for decades, I think that might be a really interesting and positive phenomenon to have political competition.
And in that same vein, look at the number of seats that the GOP has gained in this election, for example, in California. You are seeing people revolt from policies that haven't worked. And I think Trump is carrying those seats.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Well, I was going to ask you about California. Some interesting results there, as Maria was saying. You also had the ballot initiative, where you had Californians pretty clearly saying we don't want decisions to be made based on race. Wondering if, with all the people who've moved out of that state and the dysfunction, if you might, and the blackouts and the rest of it, issues of embracing non-competitive, non-productive power sources. Do you think you might see a change in California politics?
Yeah, a great question, James. And first, the fact that the voters turned back, so many of these propositions and, essentially voted like Republicans would, very stunning. But my theory is, and I think the point that both of you just made about Trump's ability to find a way into the minority communities. I would say specifically Hispanics. You know, people normally, Republicans would just write off California now for many, many years because of its strong Hispanic population. But I have to tell, and my theory is that Hispanics are just Republicans in waiting, and I mean that from the sense of they are just incredibly dedicated, hard-working family people who care about their faith and all. And I just think once they climb up the economic ladder in this next generation, there's a very good chance you're going to see, you know, Republicans outnumber Democrats someday. I know that's an optimistic view, but I think it might be what's on the horizon.
I think it's a great point.
Yeah. So what's next for Trump if he's not the victor here? You know, Reagan, we have this image, you know, he rode off into the sunset, right? What about Trump? What would you see him doing next?
Well, I don't see him being silent. I certainly expect him to be an observer and have opinions about policies that he sees and about the administration. So I don't know what he would do, but I definitely feel like he is going to have a voice.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we would have said he's getting maybe a little old to be president, but we seem to be moving in the other direction if he's not reelected. So I think it's a pretty strong legacy, and I guess what I would hope mainly is for people to focus on the achievements and you know, is he back again to run? I don't know. If not, I would hope people say there's a lot we can learn from these last 4 years, and you know, a lot of these lessons get buried under sort of the personality and the clashes with the media and so forth. But I think he's set the table for yet another economic rebound here, which we're already seeing happen. And if we get some of these vaccines, therapies on the market here, I think a lot to be optimistic about going forward. And I think some real achievements he can look back on.
I want to talk to you about the media for a moment, because presidents come and go, you know, whether they serve 1 or 2 terms. But the American media, it's there forever. At least I hope it is, you know, freedom of the press. But has the vast majority of the media having taken a stance in opposition to Trump these last 4 or 5 years. Is there hope for the media? I mean, is this going to be an adversarial relationship as it has been with Trump? Have they changed forever? Have they taken sides and now there's no going back?
Well, obviously, I mean, I'm very disappointed by the media's and its stance, because they threw out all of the things that we deem important and of value in this democracy, and because they hate Trump, you know, innocent until proven guilty. Well, maybe not, because it's Trump. Who cares? You know, wiretapped unlawfully. Well, who cares? It's Trump. And I think that because of that, the media has lost so much trust that it really is the media's job to rehabilitate that, because people don't trust them anymore. And I think that's a far bigger problem for the media than, you know, whether or not they'll be able to come back and say, oh, well, you know, forget the whole thing, and well, now I'll start covering you honestly and fairly. No, I think it's a new day, and I don't know if you're able to put the toothpaste back in the bottle, because I mean, it used to be that we trusted, you know, institutions. I mean, I trust the Wall Street Journal, and I trust. I know that in Fox Business and Fox News, you've got commentators, you've also got news people, but I just think it's a sad state of affairs because there aren't a lot of outlets that I trust. And I think that the broad public doesn't trust the media at all.
Yeah, if Joe Biden has won here, I think this could be a rough few years for a lot of media institutions. We talk about it in the book, how they love to present Trump as this sort of would-be authoritarian, a threat to all our freedoms, including freedom of the press. But the truth is, media have thrived in the Trump era. Bashing the president has been very lucrative and successful for a lot of outlets. And I think there's a question of where they go from here. So on the business side, I think media outlets that kind of defined themselves by opposition, not covering the president, but opposing him, I think could now have a bit of a reckoning. And so that relates to journalistically, I think it is an opportunity here for maybe for new outlets or maybe for people using kind of taking a new approach at existing outlets. But if Jim Acosta is politely, lovingly pitching softballs to Joe Biden at press conferences, I don't think that's a commercial or journalistic winner. And so I think a lot of people will kind of have to reassess. And I think it could be, if Biden's the president, I think it could be a rough go for a lot of media companies that have thrived in the, I guess it's, New York Times refers to it as resistance journalism, which I don't know if they acknowledge that they practice it too, but I think that that game, is maybe over.
I think it's even bigger than that. I think right now we are facing a crisis of censorship. And I think that, little by little, people are figuring out that their rights are being trampled on. And, when you look at what's going on in social media and Twitter, becoming the arbiter of truth and Twitter deciding, what's real and what isn't by putting these flagging tweets, that's going to end badly. And I think right now people are recognizing that there's censorship going on and they don't want anything to do with it. And I think that's also creating support for Trump. I got a call the other day from someone, actually, and she said to me, I'm so uncomfortable with what's going on because I feel like in these little corners of my life, my rights are getting jeopardized. And I think that's also what's coming out from this. And I think that you're going to see real change in terms of social media and in terms of the power that they have. And, it could be just a more competitive marketplace, and that's what you hope it will be rather than regulation. I think that's coming because people don't trust the media and they certainly don't like to feel like they're not getting all of the truth and that they're seeing censorship. You are seeing censorship right now in the media.
Yeah, well, in fact, Maria, I think I saw late last week you said on Twitter, I'm out. To finish this point, going back to what you were saying, James, giving the example of Jim Acosta, my worry is that the media, as they coalesced in opposition to Trump, they hate him so much that as an institution, I think they have a vested interest in Biden succeeding in order to prove themselves right. And as a result, we are going to see a media that's taken sides in Biden's favor. And that's not a pretty picture at all.
No.
No, but I do think, as Maria said, it does invite more competition. And I think also, if media outlets that have kind of been selling themselves as a cause, I think they are probably going to find that actually people do want news sources, and that news sources tend to be more valuable than cause vehicles from a business standpoint. So I hope that that the free market will cure some of this. Yeah, me as well. Listen, the both of you, given us such an important and valuable hour of your time to go through what is a fantastic book, and my congratulations to both of you. And anyone watching this, I hope you go out and get this because this is exactly the book to read at this point in time.
in our nation's history. So thank you so much for this contribution, both of you.
Thank you so much for having us. We so appreciate your time, John. Thanks for such an informative and interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Really, really fantastic to be here, and appreciate all the kind words.
Great. Maria, James, take care of yourselves. Hopefully we'll see you out here in the future.
We'd love it.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number one about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.